good morning, everyone. Welcome to FCC. We are so excited that you are here with us today. My name is Kelsey, and I have the privilege of being on the worship team here at FCC. And I just want to take a minute to welcome you and share a little bit of why we start our services by singing together. So if you're new to this community or any faith-based community, we like to take some time to sing, and there's a lot of reasons we do that. We sing to worship God, to say thank you for the joy that you bring us in this life. We sing to acknowledge his presence, to say, here I am, do with me what you will. Help me live my life in a way that shows love to others the way Jesus did. And so as we sing today, I would encourage you to read the words on the screen as you get the hang of the melodies. If you know them, sing along with us. If you're learning them, learn them with us. And we just want to invite you into this time of worship together with God. So at this time, I invite you to stand and sing with us. Here we go.
Good morning, everybody. Let's put our hands together.
My God.
you, Jesus. Sing this out. I give you glory. I give you glory for all that you brought me through. And now I'm ready for whatever you want to do. I'm moving forward to follow after you. And now I'm ready for whatever you want to do. Say that again. Oh yes, I'm ready for whatever you want to do. Your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. Come now, Lord, like never before. In every season, your grace has been enough, and I'm believing the best is yet to come. The cross before me, I hope on things above, and in you, Jesus, the best is yet to come. Your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before. Sing this with me. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and He won't stop now. I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and He won't stop now. Oh, I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and He won't stop now. Oh, I know breakthrough is coming. By faith, I see a miracle. My God made me a promise and He won't stop now. We give you glory. We give you
Why don't y'all go ahead and grab a seat? Thank you so much for being here. My name is Scott. I'm one of the pastors here and just want to welcome you and thank you for hanging out with us this morning. I want to take a minute just to give you an update on something that we call generations. And if you've been around here for a while, you're probably familiar, you know what that is. If you haven't been around, you're like, I don't know what that is, but that's okay, because I'm going to kind of explain to you what it is and where we are and where we go from here. If you go back to the 1980s, our church, FCC, we went in debt about $5 million building this building. Now, debt is not an uncommon reality for churches. In fact, a lot of churches have debt, and the history of debt in churches varies. So while having debt is pretty common, how you got there and what role it's played in your church is unique. And for us, our debt at that point was crippling. There was a point in time where like 60% of our budget went toward debt service. And it looked like we were going to close for a while, but by the grace of God and the generosity of a whole bunch of people, we were able to survive and work through that. And for the 25 years or so after that, our debt would kind of go up and down. Sometimes we'd pay some of it down, but then we would take some more out. When we rebuilt our campus, for example, we took more debt out for that. When we moved our school, Huntington Christian School, we took some debt out for that. We did pay some down, so it went kind of all over the place. But about 10 years ago, we realized that, hey, you know what, we need to really start addressing this. That debt, the level of debt that we have is we're not going to be able to pass that on to a future generation and for them to have a thriving church. You know, a lot of us lived through this time where, hey, the economy always went up and to the right, and that's really not the case anymore. And so really addressing our debt was about the long-term health and viability of FCC. And so 10 years ago, we just really started praying and saying, God, we know we need to do something about this. What do we need to do? And people continued to be generous, and we were able to get it down. And about 2.5 years ago, we sat at like $6.5 million. And we knew that we were going to have to refinance our debt in September of 2023. And so we really felt at that time that hey, God was telling us, hey, it's time to take this big step and see if we can address this. And so we started this 2-year initiative that we called Generations. And our goal at that time was if we can pay down half of our debt, so essentially if we could reduce it from $6 million to $3 million, that would be a huge first step and a huge win. It was terrible timing because it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and we didn't even know who went to the church, and we weren't even really physically it was a disaster of a time to do it. But we just really felt like, hey, God is telling us to take the step. So we did, and we started Generations, and a lot of you made contributions, and you gave, and we saw that number start to go down, and it was awesome. And then out of the blue, someone called and wanted to give us a huge gift of $5 million to go towards special projects and to debt. And that was like a game changer, because all of a sudden it changed it from hey, we don't just need to cut the debt in half. We can completely erase it. And so where we stand right now is our debt is at $110,000. That's it. That's all it is. Yeah. It is literally a miracle. And we will pay off our debt pretty close to right around the first of the year. And so, yeah, it's unbelievable. And so we'll talk more about this, but just keep it in the back of your mind. January 1st is the first Sunday of the year, but January 8th, 2023, we're going to do a big debt cancellation celebration here on the weekend, and we'll probably come together in one service and just kind of celebrate what God has done and where we go. So that's how we're kicking off now. It's super exciting. And I say that because, one, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for your generosity and your commitment during what was a crazy time. In addition to all the debt stuff, the last couple of years has been crazy. It's been crazy for all of us. And it's as someone who operates within the church world, it has been crazy for churches. That really, when you look at church attendance and involvement within our culture, church attendance and involvement in our culture has been on the decline for decades. But the last 2 years has kind of thrown it into chaos. Most churches, their attendance, their average attendance has dropped between 30 and 50%. That's just the reality across the nation. There are a few exceptions here and there, but that's pretty much the reality, and FCC is no different. But what's crazy is in the midst of all of this, there's a lot of despair and hurt among churches and among church leaders, and we've gone through a lot of that same stuff, but it's at the same time, we have this story of, but man, God has been so good, and our people have been so faithful, and even in the midst of all this chaos, look, we're going to shed this 40-year burden of debt. And it's there's excitement in that, and it's, I never thought we'd be to the point that we're at now, but God is good, y'all have been faithful, and so it's exciting that God is doing things here, and He's moving. But even in the midst of that, we still have to grapple with all the changes and everything that's still going on in the midst of that. That we are to the point we are at now because in the midst of this crazy time, we were able to come together. And so, yeah, we'll be free of this burden of debt, but there's still a lot of work to do because the goal was never, let's just be free of debt. There was a reason we wanted to be free of debt. And we wanted to be free of debt because the church exists as a missional community in that we have been given a mission into the world, to impact and be a transformational presence within our community, within our county, within our state, within our nation, within this world. And so freeing ourselves from debt was about being able to focus on that. And how do we do that? So we've taken that step, but that's not where it ends. You know, I get frustrated sometimes because California gets like kind of a bad rap sometimes. I don't know if your friends like this, but like my friends on like Facebook and everything like that, I try not to read it, but they'll post like little things about, oh, we should just sell California. And I get mad. I'm like, you people are just jealous because where you live sucks and where we live is really cool. So stop hating on California. Like, we're here because we love California. We love specifically Southern California. This is where we are. This is where God has put us. This is the best place to live. And we exist to see our community and Southern California transformed. That's why we're here. But if we want to do that in the midst of all this chaos, then we need to continue to stay together. We came together during generations. And now as generations draws to a close, I want us to think about how do we continue to stay together in the midst of everything. And I take a lot of comfort and security in this because when you look at the biblical story, like you look at the Bible beginning to end, those moments in Israel's history or those moments in the church's history when they were the most chaotic, when things were crazy, when things were happening that people didn't like or didn't expect, that's when God did his best work. That's when he was moving to do something new. And yeah, there was chaos and there was turmoil, but somehow behind all of that, God was saying, yes, but I'm doing something new and I want you to be a part of it. And so even in the midst of all this chaos, that's what we're trying to figure out. Like, what's the new thing that God is doing and how do we be a part of that? And how do we come together as the people of God to be a part of that? So as we draw kind of generations to a close here in the next couple of months, I just want to say thank you. And I want to encourage us, if we've made commitments, man, let's finish those strong. And even if you've not made a commitment, you can still give to that. You can go online, fcchb.com/give. Let's finish that strong. But let's also now start thinking about how do we stay together even after this debt is gone? What does it look like for us? Because we're still grappling with all these changes. We used to be a church about 2,000. Now we're a church of about 12 to 1,300. And in the midst of that, it's not just people left. And people really, and this isn't just true of FCC. This is true all across the nation. People left churches for different reasons. Some people did get mad at, policies, or some people got mad at politics or whatever, and they got mad and left. But a lot of people, David Kinnaman, who's the president of Barna, which is a research organization, talks about how a lot of people just got out of the habit of going. And one of the things Kinnaman talks about is what you see is not a decline of, he uses the term resilient disciples. And a resilient disciple is like someone who's committed to Jesus and faith makes an impact in their life every day and it affects how they live and how they spend their resources. He's like the number of resilient disciples hasn't gone down, but what happens is you have what he calls like consumer Christians that went to church for any one of a number of reasons, but faith was not active in their life. That's who's left. That's who's kind of just got out of the habit of going and realized, well, it didn't really make a difference anyway, so I'm just going to stop going. And so there's all different kinds of reasons people have left, but with that, yeah, things have changed. Our attendance has gone down. In addition to our attendance, our giving is down, like 20% from what it was last year. Now, that's not everything is bad because our actual physical attendance is up 30% from what it was a year or even 6 months ago. So there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of things going really well. There's still a lot of things we're working through, and we got to figure out, like, how do we function in this new reality? We're not the same church that we were. We have to think different. We have to work different. We have to act different. And what I want us all to begin to think through is, what does it look like for us? We know what it looked like for us to come together in generations. What does it look like for us to come together after that? To commit to one another. Because here's the thing. When you make a commitment to a church, whatever it is, whether it's serving or finances or whatever it is, it's not about committing to an institution. It's about committing to a group of people. The word church means gathering. It means assembly. It refers to the people. And see, we live in this culture where everything we do is individual. It's like me. Even when we talk about faith, faith is between me and God. Church is between me and God. And I also want to push back and say, it's not. It's between us and God. It's always been. There is no faith outside of a community. That's true in the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament, and the people of Israel. It's true in the New Testament, in the church. God never envisions faith to be this individual thing. Yes, there are things within me, and there's my relationship with God and all of that, but it's always this communal thing. And so what we do when we give, when we serve, it's about how we come together. And the only way we participate in this kind of vision to see the transformation of our community and of SoCal is we come together. And what I would hope is that we would all be intentional about that. So as we kind of move into this new reality, I want to put a question up on here, and this is the thing I want you to begin to think about. I want you to begin to think and pray about your giving and your involvement in FCC. I'm not going to ask you to hey, fill out this card, hey, make a commitment. I'm not going to call you or knock on your door and say, what are you going to do? But I want us to begin to think as we approach the end of generations, as we approach the end of this year, and we move into a new year. What does it look like for us to commit to one another with our time, with our talent, with our resources? Because the only way we're going to thrive, even with getting rid of all of our debt, is if we continue to come together for the sake of Jesus, for the sake of his mission in this world to see the transformation of this place. One of the things that we do every week as a church is we celebrate communion. If you have that communion, you can take it out. If you don't have one, if you didn't get one and you want to participate with us, if you raise your hand, there's people who are coming around who have some they can give you. But communion is another one of those things that we tend to think of it as an individual thing. When I was growing up going to church, it was always like when we'd come to communion, it's always like, think about your week and think about the bad things you've done and think about how much Jesus loves you. And it was all about me. And again, I get that there's personal aspects to faith, but when you look at Jesus, when he celebrated communion with his apostles, it was communals. This is what we do together. It was actually a holiday meal, which holiday meals are never individual. They're always about the people around us. Holiday meals in particular are about family. And so the fact that Jesus was celebrating this holiday meal, this Passover with his group of friends is like he was creating this new family that became the church. And so even communion isn't just about us as individuals. It's about us as a community. It's about us coming together. That everyone in here, man, we're all from different places. We're from different backgrounds. Ethnically, we're from different backgrounds. Socioeconomically, we're from different backgrounds. Our past, our lifestyle, all of that. But what brings us together is Jesus and his death and resurrection. Paul talks about that, how he's made us one. And so we celebrate this not as individuals, but as a community that is being brought together in amongst the division of the world through Jesus. That's what God is doing, that he's taking the broken pieces of the world and bringing them back together. And it starts with us as a church. So if you want to peel back that top part and take the bread. As Jesus said, this is my body that I'm giving for you. So we eat that bread to remember his sacrifice. Then if you want to peel back the top part so you can get the juice. And then Jesus took the cup and he said, this is my blood. The blood was the life of the animal. When he would give a sacrifice in the Old Testament, the blood was the symbol of life. And so for the church, for the followers of Jesus, our life is found in him. And so we take this to remember his life that he gave for us, but also it's through that we have life. So go ahead and drink that cup. And we do this to remember what Jesus has done for us, but we also do it to celebrate that he's bringing us together as a community, as his people, to partner with him in his mission to make the world new. Let me pray. Father, I thank you so much for this community, for this family. I thank you for the pleasure that me and my family have of being a part of this church. And God, I thank you for how you have moved in this church over the last 100 and almost 30 years that we've been around. And I thank you specifically for what you've done just over the last couple of years in the midst of all the chaos. That God, you have been moving and working, and it's not anything that any one of us would have predicted or even necessarily wanted. But God, maybe it's what we needed. Because somehow behind it all, we hold to this conviction that you are moving and you are working and you are creating a new world, a new life. And God, we want to participate in that. So we celebrate the death and the resurrection of Jesus to remind us what you've done and to remind us of who we are as a people in you. We thank you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Pulling on joy from heaven's reserves. You stored up enough for every winter I'm served. circumstance. This joy that I have is my inheritance joy. This is the joy of the Lord. Sing this with me. So the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Oh, He is my hope. The joy of the Lord is my strength.
There is a Savior in the valley place. He's walking beside me and He knows my pain. God, the beginning and the end. God,
God, thank you for this time of worship, God, to spend time in your presence, God, to sing songs to you and learn a little bit more about who you are, God, and how you love us, God, how you're always there for us. God, thank you for the reminder that we can trust you, God. We can trust you in everything that we do, God, and that you'll walk with us throughout our lives, God, throughout everything that we go through. We love you so much, and we're so thankful for everything that you've done in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You can have a seat.
We are continuing today our journey through the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' most famous teaching. Jesus is known by a lot of different things throughout his life, but one of the things that kind of defines him is that he was a teacher. He was often called teacher or rabbi. And so the New Testament is filled with all kinds of teachings of Jesus that are really just kind of condensed versions. But the longest, and in a lot of ways, maybe the most significant of those is the Sermon on the Mount. It's in Matthew, the book of Matthew, which is Matthew's account of the life of Jesus, in chapters 5 through 7. And the Sermon on the Mount occurs early in Jesus' public life, and it really kind of serves as his manifesto for like, hey, this is what I'm all about, and this is what my movement is all about. And we've been making our way through this, and we're getting near the end. We actually only have 2 more weeks left to go through this, and then we'll kind of finish up. And normally when we begin, if you've been here or if you've been watching online, I'll kind of set like the background a little and say, hey, this is what he's talking about. This is what we're going to look at today. But today I'm just going to read it because we're going to dive right in. Because I think today what he says just kind of speaks for itself. And I think it's something that a lot of us will feel passionate about. So here's how Jesus begins this section of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, do not judge or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So he dives right in and he talks about judgment. If you are an English person or a literature person, this is actually the verse from where the Shakespeare play Measure for Measure gets its name from. And what's interesting is if you're familiar at all with Measure for Measure, which you don't have to be, but if you're familiar at all, Measure for Measure, that whole play is really a commentary on what Jesus is saying here. That Measure for Measure is the story about, hey, be careful about what you do for other people, how you judge and criticize other people, because it's going to come back to haunt you. And so this is really what Jesus is getting at. He's saying, hey, don't judge other people because the same way that you judge other people, that's exactly how you're going to be judged. None of us like to be judged. I'm sure at some point in our life, we have all felt judged for something. And the reason why judgment hurts so bad is because judgment is in some way when someone communicates to us, could be verbally, could be non-verbally, an eye roll or something, but that they disapprove of something about us. And what judgment does is it makes us feel like we're less, like we're not good enough. There's a lot of things as people that we feel judged for. Here are just some statistics from surveys of things that we feel judged for. 90% of parents say they feel judged for the way they raise their children. 90% of parents. As a parent, I agree. 69% of people say they feel judged for their snacking habits, most specifically by their significant other, their husband or their wife or their boyfriend or girlfriend. They just feel like, do not raise your hand. Do not raise your hand. It's not what this is about. I'm just saying, these are like statistics. 72% of shoppers say they feel judged for like when they walk around the store, whether it's a grocery store or Target or something, they feel judged for what's in their cart. In that same survey, most people said they would rather pay more for something online so they don't have to feel judged by the people when they buy it. And I'm just telling you, this is my experience as a pastor who lives and shops within the community in which I work at a church. That's absolutely true. 100% true. And it's not like I feel judged all the time. And I've talked about this before, but I don't drink a ton of alcohol, but I do have alcohol occasionally. I'll have a beer occasionally, or I'll have like an old fashioned occasionally. But I don't drink all the time. But every now and then I have to buy one. Like, hey, I'm just going to buy this 6-pack of beer and stick it in here. I'm going to buy this. If I'm ever in the store and there's alcohol in my cart, and someone like from church is like, hey, Scott, or hey, Pastor Scott, no joke, I'll like dive in front. What's up? How you doing? Don't look back here. There's nothing back here to interest you. Because it's like, it's not a sin, but I don't want you to think that. I don't want you to go home and put, Pastor Scott was buying whiskey. I don't, like, we get like that. We feel judged. Another one, 40% of people feel judged for their body type. 40% walk around feeling judged. And this one, I mean, we kind of laugh about these. This one, though, can be really destructive. Because we have such a view of like what we think people should look like and everything, that a lot of times people who feel judged for their body type, like this leads to really unhealthy things like eating disorders and things like that because we feel so bad about ourselves that it just, and this is the thing about judgment. This is why judgment becomes so destructive. Because when you feel judged for these things or any other things, it leads us to be more self-critical. Like, you feel this way about me. Maybe this is true. Maybe I am a bad parent. Maybe I do have bad habits. Maybe I shouldn't buy these things. And it leads to stress and depression and all kinds of potentially other really significant negative things in our life. And so judgment is this brutal thing that happens, that when we feel judged, it literally can tear us down. It can tear our relationships down. It can tear our joy, our well-being, our quality of life down. And this is what Jesus is getting at. He's saying, do not judge. Now, before we go any further, I do need to make a distinction. And this is an important distinction. It's a super important distinction. There is a difference between being a dirtbag and a judge. Okay, there is. And we're going to talk about what the difference is. There's sometimes when people do things and we say, quit judging me, and it's like, that person's not really a judge. They're just a dirtbag. Like, they're just a jerk, they're an idiot, whatever word you choose to use. We're in church, so we're using dirtbag. But this is there is something, though, about judgment. There is this essential element in judgment that this is what makes it. Like, really, being a judge takes being a dirtbag to a whole new level. Because there's this thing that happens in judgment that it is critical. It is critical and it is negative, but it also takes it to this other level that I think really makes it dehumanizing. And it's why judgment is so destructive in our lives. Now, judgment, when you just talk about the word judgment, when you talk about the word judge, most of us would recognize that's a legal term. That's where it comes from. It comes from courtrooms. And a judgment is a decision that you make that's based on evidence. You see something, you hear something, and based on what you now know or what you've observed, what you've heard, now you're going to make a decision. And the truth is, all of us, we make hundreds of decisions every day. A lot of times, even on a subconscious level. We hear things, we see things, we smell things, and we just make decisions. There's a lady named Anna Hinson who's a corporate image consultant and a personal brand strategist. And here's what she says. She says within the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, we will make 11 decisions about them. 11 decisions. And those decisions include things like their intelligence, their socioeconomic status, their education, their competence, their trustworthiness. And those could be good or bad. That doesn't necessarily mean everything is bad, but we'll look at someone, we'll listen to them for just a few seconds, and based on all of that, again, most of this happens at a subconscious level, but we've made all these decisions about this person in 7 seconds. And these decisions that we have made, often we end up communicating them back to those people. And sometimes we communicate them in our actual words. We can just be blunt, right? You're dumb, you're stupid. Sometimes we communicate them back just in our gestures, the way we respond, like we don't pay attention because we've determined that this person's beneath us or below us or whatever. But we make these decisions, and then somehow or another, we communicate them back, and they're received as critical. When we hear someone's words, when we see someone's reaction, someone's eye roll, whatever it is, we then make that perception that, hey, this person is not approving of me for whatever reason. And that's when it hurts, right? Because, again, sometimes people's judgment is direct. Sometimes it's passive-aggressive. Sometimes it's sarcastic. Sometimes it's nonverbal. But however it comes across as hurtful because what's happening is this person, for whatever reason, is disapproving of me. And deep down, whether we all admit this or not, deep down, we all want to be approved and we all want to be validated. I want you to approve of me and who I am, and I want you to validate me and tell me, Scott, you're a good person, you're smart, you're handsome, all that good stuff. We all want that. And so when someone communicates to us that they don't approve of us and they don't validate something about us, it hurts. And so judgment, when you're talking about judgment is rooted, first of all, in that kind of decision-making, that critical decision-making process where based on something I observe about you, I'm making a decision about you. But here's what you got to remember. And this is what separates being a dirtbag from judgment. This is what elevates it. Okay, judgment isn't just about making a decision on, good or bad. Judgment also includes the remedy for how do we make this right. Because go back to a courtroom. When you go into a courtroom, you have a judge or a jury, and they're hearing all the evidence. And then when they hear the evidence, then they make that decision. Here's the decision. This is guilty or not guilty. We're making that judgment, good or bad judgment. But then in addition to that, it's like, okay, well, if it's a negative judgment, then we are also going to pass a sentence. And what that sentence is going to try to do is make this situation right to the best that it can. I mean, I think most of us would acknowledge that when a situation is wrong, a judgment can't ever really make it right, but to the best that it can, we're going to try to make it right. And so when you pass that sentence, typically like when the judge passes that sentence, there could be prison terms or probation, or there could be money awarded from one side or the other. But again, the whole goal of that is, hey, we can't take away the bad thing that happened, but to the best that we can, we're going to try to make this right as we move forward. And see, this is where judgment becomes incredibly painful. Because judgment starts out with, yes, I'm making this very critical, negative decision about you, about something in your life that I don't approve of. That's being a dirtbag. But judgment takes it one step further and says, and let me, in my superiority, tell you what you need to do to fix yourself. See, judgment recognizes that a situation is broken and seeks to provide to the best that it can the remedy for how we make this situation right. And so, if I'm judging you, or you're judging me, or we're judging each other, it's not just being critical of one another. Yes, it's being critical and saying, you are broken, and now here's what you need to do to fix yourself. And that's why judgment hurts so bad. Because judgment is this, like, I think most of us would acknowledge in some way we're all broken. I don't think any of us would stand here and go, no, I'm nailing it, man. I'm killing it. I'm batting 1,000, everything about me. No, we would all be willing to acknowledge that in some ways we all have this brokenness. And when people come along and pass judgment like, oh, well, you're a bad parent, or your eating habits are bad, or your body, or whatever it is, they pass judgment on us. And then they tell us, and here's what you need to do to fix it. Just do this, just do that. It hurts because it's like, you think I'm not trying? You think I don't want to be better? You think I wouldn't want to do it? Yes, it's really easy when you just stand there from your pedestal and tell me what I need to do to fix it. But when we're down like in the mess of our lives, it hurts. About 7 months after I became the lead pastor here at FCC, my son, who he's 13 now, but my son was diagnosed with autism. And I've talked about it before, and it wasn't a surprise. Everything's all along, and we had gone through like this year-long process of testing and everything like that. But at that point, that's when he was diagnosed. But no one knew at that time. And we didn't know, like, do we tell people? Do we not tell people? He is what you would kind of classify as like high functioning. So he's in like typical classrooms and all that kind of stuff like that. But he does have behaviors that fall along that spectrum. And when he was younger, one of the behaviors that was pretty frequent was meltdowns. He would just have meltdowns. And the reason that he had meltdowns is because he struggled with coping skills that are easy for a lot of us. That when things didn't go our way, we kind of have these ingrained coping skills of, hey, here's how we deal with this. That the way his brain's wired, he just didn't have those, and so he would have meltdowns, and he would have them sometimes in public places. And it hurt really badly because when he was having those, my wife and I would feel incredibly judged. And there was even times when people would tell us, here's what you need to do. Just do this. This is what we did with our kid, and it worked. Do this, do that. And it was bad enough that you felt like criticized, like you're not a good enough parent. That's why your child's acting up like this because you're a bad parent. Like that hurt enough. But what hurt even more is people just assuming that, oh, well, you can fix this easy. As if we weren't trying everything. As if we weren't pouring our heart and soul into it. As if we weren't desperate to help our son have the best life he could and overcome this. And see, that's why judgment becomes so dehumanizing. Because really what judgment does is it objectifies someone else. Instead of seeing someone else as another person who's like having a genuine experience with their life, judgment just objectifies them and just says, well, you know what? I'm just going to fix you. And here's all you need to do to fix it. Just do this. As if most of the struggles in our life can be fixed that easy. It's not just like, oh, well, tighten the screw a few times and then it'll be good. No, most of the messes we find ourselves in our life, they're tough and they're difficult and they're messy. And so when someone standing outside of that situation looks at us and just criticizes us and just, and then tells us, and here's what you need to do to fix it. And if you would just fix it, then you'd be fine, your kid would be fine, and your family would stop being a disaster. It's dehumanizing. And it's hurtful. I mean, I look at it at the time like we were this young family trying to find things out, and people weren't offering to help. They were just telling us what to do to fix it. You're broken, do what I say, and then you will become unbroken. And see, that's the thing about judgment, is when you look, again, go back to the courtroom setting. Judges and juries, and this is not a criticism on judges and juries, by the way, this is just how it works. Judges and juries, they do their job, and then they move on. They're not a part of the process of like, no, it's just here's what you need to do, now go do it. Go serve this sentence, or go do this, or go give these people this money, and then they move on. They don't stay involved in the process. They just keep going because that's how judgment works. You just do this, you keep going. Judgment isn't about, hey, I recognize you're broken, let me help you. What can I do to come alongside you? No, judgment just says, hey, you suck, you're broken, do this to fix it, peace, I'm out. And then we leave. And that's why it's so hurtful. That's why it objectifies people. That's why it dehumanizes people. And that's why Jesus says, don't do it. Don't do it, because when you and I judge one another, it's not helping anything. We're not benefiting one another. We're actually hurting each other. That judging one another does damage. But here's the other thing that Jesus understands. That probably the bigger reason we shouldn't judge is really because it's not our job. It is not our job to judge people. See, sometimes we make the assumption that because we have experienced painful judgment, that judgment is bad. It's not bad. Judgment is actually a good thing. In fact, within the biblical story, both in the Old Testament, the first part of the Bible, which tells the story of Israel, and in the New Testament, which tells the story of the church, central to the hope of both Israel and the church is judgment. Without judgment, there is no hope. Because here's what you have to remember. Go back to judgment. What is judgment ultimately about? Judgment is about recognizing that this situation is broken and we need to do something to make it right. That's the goal of judgment. Whether or not that actually happens in our judicial system, you could argue. But again, in its purest form, that's what judgment is about. It's about recognizing, hey, this is broken, this is messed up. We need to do the best we can to try to make it right. And so within the biblical story begins with, hey, God makes this good creation and there's a created order, and within that, it's all good, but then something breaks. And the witness of the biblical story is that the world that you and I live in is broken. There's something wrong with it. And it needs to be made right. That we need someone to do something to make this broken world right. And that's really where the hope of Israel and the church lies, in that, you know what? God is the one who's going to judge the world. God is the one who's going to judge that, yes, this isn't right, this is broken, and here's what we need to do to fix it. And so this is why in the Old Testament, you'll see all of this, like, people, God, I want you to judge the world. I want you to judge the world. And even sometimes, I will admit, sometimes, this is more so in the Old Testament than the New Testament, but sometimes in the Old Testament, that desire for judgment that comes out of, like, kind of this longing to see the world made right, sometimes it will manifest itself in phrases like, God, destroy my enemies, strike them down, defeat them, kill them, because I'm tired of them oppressing me. But ultimately, even when you look at phrases like that phrase is really rooted in hurt. It's rooted in pain. It's rooted in probably in some kind of like oppression. It's rooted in this recognition that the world isn't right. My situation isn't right. What's happening in society isn't right. And God, we need you to make it right, because you are the only one. You are the creator of the world, and as such, only you have the wisdom to make this right. Now, that hope of Israel in the Old Testament for God to judge the world, ultimately that becomes manifest in the person of Jesus. That God comes to earth in the person of Jesus. In John 3:16, like the most famous verse in the Bible, people used to, you don't see it at sports games as much anymore, but when I was a kid, people always have it at sports games. They'd hold up the sign, for God so loved the world, he gave his only son. A lot of us have heard that before, but actually John 3:17, the next verse, is a great verse. And this is what Jesus says. It says, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. That this is why God entered the world in the person of Jesus. God came to the world in the person of Jesus. Why? To save it, because there's this recognition on God's part that yes, it is broken. It's not what it's supposed to be. That if you go back and read the book of Genesis will talk about rebellion and sin and all, but through all of that, there's this corruption where this is not how it's supposed to be, and so I need to save it. But again, how is he going to save it? Here's what Jesus says, John 9:39. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world. I'm here to judge it, because in order to overcome evil, you first have to decide it is evil. That's what's required in a judgment, right? If someone gets pronounced innocent in a case, you're not still going to pass a sentence on them. You're innocent, and you're going to prison for 20 years. Why? I'm innocent. In order to provide the remedy for how we make this situation right, you first have to deem something to be wrong, to be broken. And so Jesus comes into the world to save the world. And the means by which he's going to save the world is he's going to judge it. But here's what's crazy about this whole Jesus story that I don't think we always grasp sometimes, is typically the one who pronounces the sentence is the judge, right? And in a courtroom, the judge sits in the position of power. They're up high, they got the robe on, they're looking down at the accused, and boom. But Jesus actually flips that completely around. Because Jesus doesn't pass judgment by sitting in the seat of power. Jesus passes judgment by sitting in the seat of the accused. And it's Jesus who's put on trial. And it's Jesus who faces the sentence. And it's Jesus who's tortured and beaten and mocked and murdered and killed and buried. And it's through his own death that he passes judgment and says, this is what's wrong. And rather than dish it out on someone else, I'm going to absorb it into myself so that I can overcome it. And now through his resurrection, not only does he overcome what is really wrong with the world, but he begins to make the world new. This is what the early church serves as a witness to, that through the death and the resurrection of Jesus, God has judged the world as, hey, this is broken, and now through his death and resurrection, we're remaking it the way that it was always designed to be. So Jesus, yes, judgment is the word. We don't like the word judgment for all the reasons we've talked about, but in Jesus, he's saving the world by judging it, but it's completely different from what we think about it, because he doesn't judge from a position of power. He does from a position of weakness and of service. And so when you talk about judgment, judgment is not a bad thing, in the sense that it is necessary in order for there to be hope. And again, the testimony of Israel and the church is that God, as the creator and savior of the world, is the only one in the position and with the wisdom and the authority to judge. And so the hope is, yes, God, judge this so that we can overcome it, so that things can be made right. So judgment is central to hope. So again, part of the reason why judgment, when we judge one another, going back to Jesus' words, don't judge one another, part of the reason it's so damaging is because it's dehumanizing. But part of the reason it's so damaging is because when we judge one another, we put ourselves in the place of God, and we do something that only he is supposed to do. And let me just tell you this. Whenever human beings put themselves in the position of God, it always goes bad. Always. Whenever we do something that is only God's responsibility or God's job, what always follows is death and destruction. Always. Every single time. We're not to judge because it's not helpful, it's dehumanizing, it's demoralizing, but we're also not to judge because it's not our job. It's God's job. God is the one who's judging the world in order to overcome it, in order to create a new world and a new life and a whole new reality. So we let God be God and we be us. Now, this is where it starts to get really kind of messy. When Jesus says, do not judge because you will be judged, what he doesn't mean is you should never have difficult conversations with one another about lifestyle issues or choices or things that are going on in your life. See, a lot of times, anytime someone says something about our lifestyle, anytime someone confronts us, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, we think, well, that's judgment. No, remember judgment. Judgment is, you're bad, you're wrong, you're broken, here's what you need to do to fix it, peace, I'm out. And Jesus is saying, it's not your job to fix people. It's not our job to fix. It's not our job to save people. People aren't objects for us to fix. Okay, God in his love and wisdom is the creator and savior. He's the one who's making everything right. That's not our job. But that doesn't mean we aren't to sometimes confront one another about difficult life choices. We aren't to have difficult conversations with each other. Jesus, we often look at Jesus as, oh, he's so kind, he's so gentle. And yes, Jesus was incredibly committed to love and nonviolence, but he was also not a pushover. He wasn't afraid to address things in the world and in people's lives that were causing harm or destruction. And so in fact, Jesus goes on, and after he says this, do not judge, for you'll be judged the same way, this is what he says next, verse 3. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. And here's the important part. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So Jesus gives us this image of, this is actually what judgment looks like, and it's an ugly image. Judgment looks like, I have a tree sticking out of my eye, and I'm trying to help you fix this little piece of sawdust in your own eye. And I think we'd agree, that's actually what judgment looks like. That's why it makes us so angry, that's why it's so hurtful. So Jesus says, don't do that. But notice what he says. He says, what you need to do is, I'm not telling you to never address the sawdust in someone else's eye. Jesus says, I'm asking you to acknowledge yours first and to begin to deal with yours first, and then you can help someone else deal with theirs. So it's not a matter of, hey, Jesus isn't advocating like this, just, hey, laissez-faire, you do you only live once, you do your own thing, and none of us, he's not saying that at all. Jesus operates as if there is such a thing as morality, as if there is such a thing as, hey, this is right and this is wrong. And to a certain extent, Jesus expects his followers to have some kind of influence on the larger culture and the world around them. He does. He says, but it's tricky. And you got to make sure that you do it in the right way. And so if we just go in with this giant log in our eye, who are we to think that we can help fix someone else? I remember when, it's like, broken people trying to help other broken people. I remember when my wife was coming to the point where she was going to give birth to Jeremy, our son. And her doctor, the doctor that she'd been with the whole time the doctor was supposed to deliver the baby, like he broke his leg. And so he wasn't going to be there to deliver Jeremy, which was, kind of a pain and everything like that. But I remember going with my wife to one of the last appointments in the doctor's office, to see the ultrasound and stuff. And we're sitting in the lobby, and I'm sitting next to these two ladies. And one lady, she's about to give birth too. I was afraid she was going to give birth in the room because she was like ready to go. But I'm listening to them talk about the fact that this doctor's not going to be there to deliver the baby. And this lady's upset. She is upset. She's like, I don't care if his leg is broken. He can wheel himself in here. He's going to deliver this baby. And she's using all kinds of like colorful metaphors to, refer to this doctor and how horrible this is. And I'm sitting here listening to this lady. And the thing I'm thinking to myself is, I don't want this guy to come in. He's got a broken leg. He's going to drop my baby. Like the man is broken. Let him stay home at rest. He can deliver our next kid if we have a next one. I want like a healthy doctor who's there. So if something goes wrong or if something happens, like I don't want this like casted up doctor in a wheelchair to deliver. That just doesn't seem good. And this is exactly the kind of the point that Jesus is making. Is like, look, if we're so incredibly broken, don't go to someone else and start trying to fix their things. We have got to own up and deal with our own stuff first. Then we can be in a position to help someone else. Now here, that doesn't mean that we're ever going to be perfect. You and I are never going to get to the place where it's like, hey, I'm perfect and you're not. No. That's not what Jesus is saying. But Jesus is saying, are you willing to own up to your own things and recognize your own things and work on your own things? Because you have to have that posture if you're ever going to help someone else overcome whatever they have that's going on. And so Jesus' point is, yeah, we can confront each other sometimes and we can have difficult conversations, but we need to do it in the right spirit and with the right attitude. And then he goes on and he says this is kind of an interesting phrase in verse 6. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and tear you to pieces. Now there's a few phrases that Jesus makes in the New Testament like this that they're kind of like we understand what they mean, but it's kind of hard to understand fully how they would be received in the first century world to the people that he's talking to and even the people he's talking about. Because what Jesus is doing here is he's drawing a distinction between Jews and Gentiles, who are Gentiles and non-Jew. And kind of a derogatory way to refer to Gentiles is pigs and dogs. So it's kind of, and it's Jesus is talking to Jews at this point, so he makes this kind of statements that it's really hard to understand exactly how it'd be received, but this is what he's getting at. He's making this distinction. And here's why he's doing this. Jesus makes it clear in his life that he came for the sake of Israel, for the sake of the Jews. Not to the exclusion of Gentiles, but for the benefit of the Gentiles. Israel always had this global purpose that they were going to bless the nations. They never fully realized that, so Jesus comes down to embody what it really means to be Israel, because it's through him that all the nations will be blessed, ultimately through his death, burial, and resurrection. But during his life, Jesus is like, look, I'm here to regather the people of Israel to send you out to become who you were always supposed to be. And so Jesus' point here is he's drawing this distinction between Jews and Gentiles, between the people of God and people who aren't the people of God. And here's the reason he's doing it, because he's saying when it comes to confronting one another, make sure you do it with the right audience. This isn't about confronting people who have no commitment to God. Gentiles have no commitment to God. They have no commitment to the laws of Israel. Don't try to hold people accountable to something that they've never committed to. I think Paul says it clear in 1 Corinthians 5, 12 through 13. He says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside the church? God will judge those outside. Just Paul saying the same thing to Jesus. He goes, look, When it comes to confrontation, when it comes to holding each other accountable, when it comes to saying, hey, this is destructive, stop doing it, Paul says, you need to make sure you're doing that in the right setting. That yes, Jesus expects us to do it. Yes, it's a part of life. But our goal is not to go out into the world and just to cast criticism on people who have no commitment to God or to Jesus and just tell them they're wrong and everything they're doing is evil and they're going to hell. Now, let me make this distinction. There is destructive behavior that destroys people, that destroys lives, that destroys families. I'm talking about things like addiction and just lifestyle choices that are literally, they're killing people, they're killing families. Like, that's the kind of stuff when you organize like interventions and things like that, that needs to be done really because it's in those people's best interests and it doesn't matter your faith stance or whatever. What we're talking about with Jesus, what Paul's addressing, is a lot of times what we would label as accountability. Like, it's kind of like these issues of morality that like, hey, this is God's law and this is what you should do. And Paul's whole point is, how can I hold someone accountable to the commands and the teachings of Jesus who has never made a commitment to the teachings of Jesus? And if I'm confronting someone and just telling them that, Paul's like, that's not my place. But within the church, because we are a community, we are a family that is being brought together by the death and resurrection of Jesus, yeah, that's sometimes part of life, is that we confront each other. But we do so with the right posture. We do so with the right attitude. We own up to our own stuff, and then we help one another. There's a lot of Christians I meet who we struggle with this because we just say like, well, I need to be truthful. I need to be truthful. Really, a lot of times we say that as like, that's my reason for being a jerk. I'm just being truthful. You ever know like jerks for Jesus that like, I'm just telling you the truth. I'm just telling you like it is. Sorry, that's my own personal baggage right there. This is my public therapy right now. But there's a lot of people like we have that, like we need to be truthful, and it's not loving if you don't tell someone the truth. And the funny thing about that is typically people or churches that have that stance then judge other churches that don't have that stance. And you're not a true church. And I get it, like it's messy. Andy Stanley, who's a pastor at North Point in a church in Atlanta, he talks about how sometimes in life there's problems to be solved and sometimes there's tensions to be managed. And we like problems to solve because it's easier. Right? It's like one or the other. This is simple. I can just do this, I can just do that. But this is one of those things that it's not a problem to solve. It's a tension to manage. That understanding how we confront each other in love with the right attitude, like it's not just as easy as like, oh, this is the way to do it. It's not like there's a template that you do every time. It takes love, it takes compassion, it takes discernment. See, one of the things that people point to is earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, the same Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is telling us don't judge, he talks about the people of God, and he uses the metaphors of salt and light. And he says, you are the salt and the light of the earth. And these metaphors have to do with reflecting the goodness of God, with preserving society. And so in these metaphors, Jesus implies to a certain extent that, yes, the people of God, the church, that we should have some kind of influence on the world around us. We should have some kind of impact on the people around us, even the people who think differently, who live differently. But then a few verses later, he comes around and says, yeah, but do not judge. And so a lot of us, we struggle with, well, what is being salt and light, and, standing for truth and goodness and reflecting God's character, and when does it become judgment? And the point is, it's not like it's this crystal clear, boom, do this, don't do that. It's messy. And here's the thing about judgment. Judgment avoids the mess. Because judgment just stands back and says, you're broken. I don't care if you're within the church, out of the church. I don't care if I have a relationship with you, I don't have a relationship with you. I don't care what your past is. I don't care what you've been through. I don't care what you're going through. You're broken. Let me tell you how to fix it. When I judge you, I can avoid the mess of your life. Being salt and light doesn't avoid the mess. Being salt and light recognizes that, you know what? What you're doing may not be God's best for you. But also understand that you're a human being and you have a past. You've been through things and you're going through things and you're dealing with things. And so to the best that I can, I'm going to try to engage you and enter into your mess out of love. Not because I'm trying to fix you, not because I'm trying to solve what's wrong with you, but because I love you. And so living as salt and light versus judgment, there's all these kind of like factors that you have to take into account. And here's just a few. First, what's the relationship? Do I know you? Do I not know you? Are you some stranger? Am I just going to shout things through a bullhorn at you and tell you how jacked up you are and then tell you to fix it? Or do I know you? Have we been friends? Have we been family? And we can talk about this from a deep personal way. That depends on what we do. The relationship absolutely dictates how we respond. The setting. What is the setting in which I'm going to confront you about this behavior in your life? Am I just going to show up and yell it at you? Am I going to take you to coffee and I'm going to come to your house? Is it just me and you? Is it other people? What are the circumstances? Why am I confronting you on this at this particular point? What is it that's happening? What is it that I'm seeing? What is this doing to you? What is this doing to the people around you? Also, the outcomes. What is it that I'm hoping? Am I hoping that, you know what, you're just jacked up and I want to see you fixed? Or is it, you know what, I want you to have a better family life. I want you to not struggle so much financially and you're throwing a lot away. What are the outcomes I'm hoping for? Is this for your benefit or is this just so I can feel superior to you and I can just put another jewel in my crown and God will be pleased and happy with me? And what are the roles? What role am I willing to play? If I'm going to confront you on some issue in your life, what role am I willing to play in that resolution? Because you know what? If I'm not willing to play any role in that resolution, I probably have no business even talking to you about this. If I'm just going to judge you and walk away and not have anything to do with how this works out, I probably got no business talking to you. And so again, these things it takes discernment. Jesus, yes, going back to the whole truth thing, Jesus is described as truth. God, Jesus describes himself as truth. John talks about Jesus as truth, but John also describes Jesus as grace. And the word he uses is he's the fullness of grace and truth. He's both simultaneously. He's not one or the other. He doesn't alternate. He is the fullness of both. And so it's not just about being truth. It's about being truth and grace at the same time. And that's messy. It's really messy. And we prefer judgment because, again, judgment avoids the mess. Judgment allows me to tell you what's wrong, tell you what you need to do to fix it, and then I can move on without getting involved. And that's the easy approach. It's a lot of times the religious approach. It is, however, not the approach that Jesus took. Here's the approach that Jesus took. In the world, which is a reference to outside of the people of God, outside of Israel, outside of the church. What Jesus did when it came to the truth is he embodied it. He lived it. And this is what the early church does. The early church, rather than criticize and judge the world in which we live, the world that may not hold the same values that we within the church do, instead of criticizing, we embody what it means to live with Jesus as our King. We embody what it means to love one another in the same way that Jesus loved us. It doesn't mean we never talk about it. If Jesus is central to your life, you will at some point inevitably talk about him. If you don't ever talk about him in your relationships, I would actually push back and say, well, have you really centered your life around him? Because we talk about our kids and we talk about our sports teams and we talk about our cars and our clothes and every other dumb thing we're all about. So if we don't talk about Jesus ever, again, I'm not saying that the first 25 seconds you meet someone, you have to tell them about Jesus, but if it never comes up, I would question, is he really central to your life? So it doesn't mean we never talk about it. It just means that what we do is we embody it. I'm not here to confront everything that's wrong with you. I'm here to embody, this is what it means to live with Jesus as King of your life. And sometimes, I'm going to talk about this is why I do that, and this is what that's all about. But then within the church, you know how we live? We live in such a way as we build each other up. Because you're trying to live with Jesus as King. I'm trying to live with Jesus as King. That's not an easy way to live, particularly in a secular world that's harsh to that. So how do we build one another up? And sometimes that means challenging each other. And sometimes that means confronting each other. And sometimes that means dealing with, the difficulties that we have. And that's tough. And Jesus calls us to do that. But he calls us to do that with the right attitude. And he calls us to do that understanding that we are witnesses, not lawyers. Okay, you know what a lawyer is? No offense to lawyers. We love you if you're a lawyer. But you know what lawyers do? Lawyers argue. And lawyers defend. You know what witnesses do? Witnesses share from their own experience. A lot of us, the problem we get in is we try to be Jesus' lawyer. Bob Goff, I think, was the one who I first heard say this. Jesus doesn't need a lawyer. He doesn't need you to defend him. He doesn't need you to argue for him. And he never asked you to be his lawyer. You know what he asked us to be? His witnesses. You will be my witnesses. You will go out into the world and you will embody what it means to live with me as your King. And you will share with people, here's why you do that. Don't argue. Don't yell. Don't judge. Don't criticize. Don't condemn. We're to live as witnesses. And living as witnesses is messy. And so when it comes to those moments where, we need to confront each other, we need to challenge each other, we need to make sure we do it with the right attitude. So here's just a couple things to think about. I made them all start with an A, so it's really easy, right? It's accountability. If you're going to confront someone, here's the things I want you to ask. First of all, who's your audience? Is this someone that you should be confronting? Again, maybe even if they're outside the church, maybe their behavior is so destructive that you need to. But if like, hey, I'm just going to criticize you because you're not living up to God's standard. Well, if you never made a commitment to God's standard, how am I holding you accountable to a standard that you never committed to? Even if I think it's best for you. How instead can I embody this truth to you in your life? So make sure it's the right audience. Make sure you have the right attitude. Make sure you're not going in with this superiority where I'm going to fix you. But you're going in as, you know what? I'm a human being just like you, and I struggle just like you, and I'm owning up to my own mess, and how can we help each other? Secondly, what's your aim? What's your goal? Are you just trying to fix them? Or do you want something more for them? And then lastly, assistance in terms of like, what role are you willing to play? Because if you're not willing to play a role, don't. If you're not willing to come alongside and help them, do not confront them at all. That's not your place. See, the big problem with judgment is that it's cold and confrontational without having any like really hope of resolution. It's just, it's distant. It's like, I'm just going to come in and drop this bomb and leave. The reason we opt for judgment a lot of times is because we live in a very cold society. Even when we go through the store, we don't look at each other. We're not super warm. We avoid each other. Nowadays, when there's a knock on the door, the phone rings. We're like, who's calling? Why are they calling? I'm not expecting this. We just live in a very cold society. And judgment is a cold way to interact with people. And what Jesus is advocating for is that if we really want to make an impact in our culture, in our society, in people's lives, we need to learn to engage people as individuals, as human beings, as subjects, as fellow humans like us who are having an experience, and wherever our faith is, that our faith may be different. We may be near from God. We may be far from God, whatever terms you want to use to describe it. But we are all human beings. And the way we impact one another is to engage one another in the mess. So here's what I want to do. Usually when church is done, we pray, and then we get up and we go. And we say our separate, we just stay in our lanes, get our kids if we have to, and we leave. But I want to try something different. I'm going to close in prayer in just a minute, and then we're going to be done. We're not going to sing a song. There's no announcements. We're just going to be done. But here's what I want to ask you to do, because one of the things we're trying to do here at FCC is to create a culture that is different from the world in which we live, to create a culture where we're willing to engage in the mess of each other's lives. And so here's what I'm going to hope you'll do. When you get up, instead of just bolting for the door, I hope that you will turn to someone next to you, preferably someone you don't know, and just ask them this question. I'm going to put it on the screen. Tell me something interesting about yourself. Now, for those of us like you, like me, if you're an introvert, don't freak out. This isn't like confess your deepest, darkest sin, or it's not you can make it simple. Here's my favorite sports team. Here's where I grew up. Here's my favorite food. Here's a hobby about me. Doesn't have to be like this simple, or it doesn't have to be this deep, complex thing. Just something simple that's, this tells you something about me. I grew up in Cleveland. I'm a Yankees fan. My favorite food is pizza, or whatever. But it's just a way to begin to engage someone and to recognize that, you're a human being, and just like me, you have all these kind of same feelings and thoughts and experiences. So what can we get to know about each other a little bit? It may be awkward at first, but I promise you, the person next to you is probably really nice, and they're probably not going to bite you. And I'm not saying we all have to be best friends, but we all have to learn to engage one another. So do me a favor, stand up. I'm going to pray for us. And then we're going to go about our week. And I hope you have a great week. But I hope that you will talk to one another, that we will talk to one another. Ready? Let me pray. God, I thank you so much for each person in this room. I thank you for the journey that we have all been on, and I thank you for bringing us to this moment and this time. And God, I thank you for the privilege of being a part of your community and of your people and what it is you're doing in the world. That through your death and resurrection, you are making everything new. You're bringing everything back together. You're making everything right. And God, sometimes that's messy, and as people, we try to avoid the mess. So my hope is that we will not avoid the mess, that we will enter into the mess, and we will learn to engage one another as individuals, and we will learn to love and to serve and to build one another up and to be witnesses in this place for your goodness. God, we love you. We thank you. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you all. Have a great week.